I got to know the Watts Gallery in 1961 when I was in a car going along the A3, and I looked out the window and there was the sign to Watts and the gallery sign there. And I proceeded down the A3 in the company of two police officers, and I went to a place called Pepper Harrow, which is only about 3 or 4 miles from here, which was a reformatory for London scum. That's how I was described by the two police officers who took me there. I was a piece of scum. I was a 15-and-a-half-year-old piece of scum. By the time I was 15 and a half, I had got into all sorts of trouble: shoplifting, housebreaking, stealing cars, smashing up cars, daubing swastikas on churches, burning down stations, and I was a complete piece of ne'er-do-wellism, shall we say. Anyway, I went down to Park House, it was called, Pepper Harrow. It later turned into a place for severely mentally challenged people, and it became the Pepper Harrow or the Pepper Harrow experiment, which goes on in some form or other. So I looked on occasions over the next 2.5 years, and I looked at this sign to Watts Gallery, and it didn't mean an awful lot to me until on one occasion I decided I would leave my institution without their permission, which was called absconding, and I walked across country to Godalming, and I got the train. There was a public school nearby called Charterhouse, and what was so wonderful about Charterhouse, they all talk like that. And I found that if I stood around and put my hands in my pockets and talked like that, and said hello, everybody was, you know, like the man in the station, instead of asking me for a ticket, would say, "Oh, this way, young sir," and all that. Surrey was like that in the early 60s. So I got on the train without a ticket, and I scarpered up to London, stole a car, smashed it at up 102 miles an hour. All this stuff is germane, and eventually ended up at Ashford Boys Prison, which is now, which at the time, which is now called the Feltham Young Offenders. Long and short of it is I was there a while. I learnt to read and write at the age of 16. Absolutely marvellous age to learn to read and write. I recommend to every one of your children not to learn to read and write until you're 16, because when you learn to read and write at 16, you really want to read and you want to do all sorts of wonderful things. I went back to Park House, and there the screws, they weren't called screws, they were called masters, and the screws used to really like the idea that if they met anybody who wanted to stuff toys for Guildford Hospital or whatever, they would lay on the facility. And what I wanted to do was draw and paint. So they laid on the facility. In fact, they laid it on so well that after being there for 2.5 years, I came out just short of my 18th birthday, and I was phenomenally good at drawing and painting. I'd won all sorts of awards for the National Association of Boys Club, you know, I'd won, you know, grade D or something like that. And then I went to Chelsea School of Art, and I was absolutely marvellous. I was so good, and I'm still one of Britain's best undiscovered artists. And modest with it. Art absolutely changed my life. If I had carried on the trajectory that I was on, I would have been a petty thief. I'd have carried on as a petty thief. Then I'd have got a bit serious, and then I probably would have murdered a few people who got in the way and all sorts of things, and I probably would have ended up as a professional criminal. But because art got in the way, and the system that used to exist, when you went into prisons, they used to reform you. Unfortunately now, you go in bad and you come out worse often, because they warehouse you. They don't invest in turning you around, and then they let you out into the community after a few years, and you continue to cost the community an enormous amount of grief. And unfortunately, that is the way that the prison system has moved from reform to warehousing. And now I'm the posh guy that you see here. The posh guy who in 1967 met a Scotsman in Scotland, of all places, who, because there's a lot of them, who became a great friend of mine, and 20 years later, after not seeing him for 20 years, he'd morphed into a multi-millionaire. This person gave me the money to start the big issue. I'm really glad that my ability to bring about social change comes out of trade. It doesn't come out of money that's dropped from God. It's come from the fact that the Roddicks made a shed load of money and then they apportioned some of it for social good. And they gave me some of that money. And lo and behold, we started in 1991 with a very simple message. And that was that up until then, with 501 homeless organizations in London alone, not one of them gave the homeless the chance of making their own money and getting work. Lo and behold, they supplied everything, from somewhere to sleep, somewhere to wash, sandwiches and all that. That's one of the problems of giving to the poor. If you give to the poor, you have to give them an opportunity of getting out of poverty. Give them opportunity. Give them the chance of working. Give them social mobility. Those wonderful people who have done art in the big issues, I would love them all to come out of the prison system and not given a job working in Poundland. I would like them to be able to express their art and to move, dare I say, into the middle classes. That's the best place to be. I joined the middle classes as soon as I could, and I've stuck there. And I know it sounds a very classist thing, but the best place, the best cure for poverty is social mobility. And we gave the homeless the chance of embracing work and embracing opportunity and moving out of poverty. I'll end there. Well, I won't end there, I'll carry on. But I will carry on in a different frame. When I was 18, I worked for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. I worked on their trees, I climbed up the trees. I was a light little chap at the time, so I could climb right to the top of the trees. And one day, this was it, along the Kensington Church Street, I discovered a little book outside a bookshop. It was a cheap little book, and it was called The Pre-Raphaelite Dream. And it was by a guy called William Gaunt, who wrote The Pre-Raphaelite Dream, The Aesthetic Adventure, and another one, The Olympian Goddess, or Gold, or whatever. And these three books were all about art from about 1840 to 1900. And that was a time in 1963-64 when people were laughing at Watts, when they were laughing at Ruskin, when they were laughing. You could pick up Burne-Jones drawings for a couple of £100. And I looked at this book and I was absolutely mesmerized by this wonderful artistic manifestation. And I have been a Victorian supporter and lover of the art of Watts and the art of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhoods. I've spent an enormous amount of time and effort in writing and thinking in those times. But what I'm really interested in is how can we get our people who are in the sticky stuff, how can we get them out? And art is one of the best ways. Art is a great leveler. Art is an opportunity of turning your life around. I used art to get out of the sticky stuff, and that's why I'm John Bird MBE.